Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video I'm getting back on track for my series of first looks at Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. Today's video is specifically the DM's Guide Chapter 11 Encounters. So what I've been doing with the series is I haven't necessarily been going chapter by chapter through each of these videos, but what I have been doing is I've been homing in on certain aspects of dungeon mastery as it relates to this edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and focusing in on those. You know, just the elements of it that really strike me as being different from the previous edition. Or just different from my own practices, because as I've said frequently before, I never actually had played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Edition, and so this is myself just reading through the DMG and previously the Player's Handbook, and just picking up little elements of the gameplay that really stand out to me. So without further ado, let's jump right into the issue of encounters. So here we have the PDF. So if the imagination of players and DMs are fuel of the AD&D game, encounters are the engine that makes it go. Without encounters, nothing happens. Without encounters, players can't slay fearsome trolls, rescue the villagers from a band of orcs, chase down a petty thief, outwit an evil wizard, or humble a mighty tyrant. Encounters make up the plot of the adventure, each in some way furthering the tale or building the background of your campaign world. Without encounters, without the opportunity to meet and to deal with others, your campaign world is just going nowhere. To use encounters, it is important to understand what they are. An encounter is a meeting with an NPC or monster, or an event that might affect the player characters. As a DM, you create and advance the thing, person, event, or monsters encountered. Describe the scene of the encounter to the players. Role play the reaction of all the creatures involved except the player characters. Describe the results of player character actions during the encounter. These are a big part of the DM's duty in a role-playing game, in addition to the task of interpreting the rules and handling the mechanics of play. So what is an encounter? An encounter is best defined by two broad criteria. If the described events lacks either of these, it isn't a true encounter. It may be a described scene, an event, or a bit of mundane business, but it is not a role-playing encounter. The first, an encounter must involve a thing, an event, NPCs, characters or monsters, or a DM-controlled player character. A meeting of two player characters handled by the players alone is not an encounter. It's an action between the players themselves. Second, an encounter must present the possibility of a meaningful change in the player character's abilities, possessions, or knowledge, depending upon the player's decisions. The keys here are meaningful change and player decision. For each character with 500 gold pieces in his pocket, going into a tavern and spending 3 gold pieces on drinks is not a meaningful change. If the character had to spend the same 500 gold pieces in the same tavern to get information about the Black Tower across the river, the character has experienced a meaningful change. He's now broke. All right, so you can see the difference between what is a meaningful change and what is a non-meaningful change. they continue on. If the player doesn't make a decision, then he's just coasting along, letting the DM do everything. Go to the tavern and spending 3 gold pieces on food and drink isn't much of a decision. Choosing to go bankrupt to learn what may or may not be useful information and fairly significant. The player is going to have to think about the choice. How badly does he want this information? How reliable is this information? Does he need the money for something else, like new equipment, or can he get a better price? All right, so they're just going through the nuance of the differences between a non-meaningful and a meaningful event or encounter. And they continue going on with various examples here. So there are several different types of encounters, and we're going to begin with planned encounters. A planned encounter is one that the DM has prepared in advance, one tied to a specific place, event, or condition. These can be divided into 2 types: keys and triggers, described below. Keys is the simplest of planned encounters, is called a key. A listing of who lives where, what they have, what they might do if the characters enters their room, visit their farm, or explores their cave. This key can also contain colorful details about otherwise boring or empty rooms, creating detail for player characters to explore. Here's how a sample key of an ogre's den, a 3-chambered cave, might be written. And then there's the main chamber, the sleeping chamber, and the treasure room. All right, and so each of those is going to have a description and explain who is there, what are they doing, what might they do when the character enters the room, and then what is the potential gain from effectively engaging that encounter. We then go on to triggers. Another type of planned encounter is a trigger. It can be useful with a key or by itself. A trigger is simple either or if then type statement. Let me read that again. A trigger is a simple either or if then type of statement. So basically you're asking, well, if you do this, then this happens. That's a trigger. All right. And so triggers are something that occur based on a decision that the player characters have made, or based on a previous event. So triggers are kind of a secondary from the key event themselves. And as they say, you can do one or the other, or you can later combine. Combining keys and triggers. Many DMs make use of the dual arrangement for preparing encounters. First, they prepare a key describing the appearance of the encounter's location, items in them, and other things that are relatively non-changing. Then they write a trigger, focusing on the characters and the actions. When they need to describe a room, they rely on the key, while the trigger describes the plot of the adventure. Although this requires a little more setup, this allows different events to happen in the same place or area, giving the feeling of continuity and the adventure and campaign. All right, so those are all forms of set or pre-made encounters. The second type of encounter is random encounters. So random encounters, in addition to planned encounters, the DM also runs random encounters. These are tied to specific place or event. They are based on the chance during the course of an adventure, and the DM makes encounter checks, rolling a die to determine if a random encounter occurs. If one does, the DM chooses or randomly rolls for an encounter using a random encounter table he has prepared or one provided with a published adventure. When a check indicates an encounter is imminent, a creature or NPC determined by the encounter tables will arrive in the area in the next few minutes to investigate. Many encounters end in combat, but this isn't necessary. It is possible to talk to intelligent creatures, whether in a dungeon or out in the wilderness or in the streets or town or city. Should you use random encounters? Some argue that random encounters are foolish and should not be used. These people maintain that everything should be under the control of the DM and there should be no surprises for him while playing the game. Certainly, random encounters can be abused through overuse and they can create illogical encounters. The word foolish would certainly apply to a DM who allowed the characters to be attacked by an orc warband in the middle of a peaceful human city. However, when used judiciously, random encounters add to everyone's fun in a couple of ways. They add variety, they add challenge, and let's see what else they talk about. Basically, variety and challenge. Characteristics of a random encounter tables: you have the uniqueness of the encounter, you have frequencies of the encounters. So how often might they occur, or how often do you have to check for them? You have the logic. The other significant factor restricting encounter tables is rationality. Everything on the encounter table should be justifiable for one reason or another. By requiring justification, the DM can quickly narrow his range of creature choices down to a reasonable number. Oh, excuse me. In essence, winnowing the chaff from the wheat. Create encounter tables, so you can create your own where you're going to basically do 2d10 roll, 2d10 roll, and you will end up with any possibility. Most commonly will be the common, as would be expected, uncommon on both ends. So you can basically see the range from very rare on the low end, very rare on the high end, and then less rare and then common in the very center or on the average rolls, basically. So that would be first. Then you can see what are some of the common, uncommon, rare, and very rare, obviously dependent upon the region that the encounter is taking place and so forth. So for the most part, I think that a DM is going to end up having to tweak this randomness so much that it's probably unnecessary to even do this. And once I change views and I talk a little bit about this, I mean, you'll see where I'm coming from. At least hopefully you do see where I'm coming from here. So you have the percentile dice attaching to the type of encounter that could occur. Dungeon encounters tables. So if you have, let's see what they're determining dungeon level. Figure the appropriate level of the particular creature is simple. Look up or calculate the experience points of the creature and check the number of table 55. This will tell you where to place the creature. Again, that's not something that I would roll as a random amount or even check the table and look at. I have enough experience to know how to how to place appropriate level of creatures or encounters for the player party. If you're looking at the experience points of the, I'm not even quite sure what they're talking about here. Figuring the appropriate level for the particular creature is simple. Look up and calculate the experience points of the creature and check this number of tables. So if the creature is between 1 and 20 experience points, the creature level is a 1. Why would you even do this? You'd have to look at the player party experience points to determine what should be in there as well. So kind of strange. Like I said, this is a walkthrough. This is a flip through, basically, and kind of the first time that I'm really taking a look at it. And so I'm already seeing some things where I wouldn't necessarily do this. I do like this chart. I've looked at this. So the frequency and chance of wilderness encounters, and so you'll make an encounter check. And the chance is on a 1 in 10. So that's what this represents here, these numbers here. So a 1 in 10, a 1 in 10, a 2 in 10, 1. The most in a swamp, a 4 in 10 chance of encountering something. And then you'll look at the time of day. All right. And you'll notice here that between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., there are no encounters. Between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., no encounters. So there are several time frames during the day where the player characters won't involve or won't potentially interact with any kind of a random encounter. Again, I don't understand why they left that kind of those little gaps, like what they actually signify. But they're there. So if your players are aware that, between 10 and 11 a.m. we'll never encounter any kind of a random encounter, then they might reserve certain activities, especially those kind of activities that you normally don't talk about in the game session. Whether it be bathroom breaks or whatever, for the player characters, then having those off-hour times is when they can utilize that. You might have others that choose, we're going to travel, this particular leg of our journey during one of those hours to ensure that while we're doing this difficult task, potentially, that we're not encountering any random encounters. Now, that's a little bit meta, or maybe even a lot meta, because the players are using their understanding of the chart and assuming that their characters understand that same kind of thing. So as a DM, I would probably tweak that and make sure it doesn't occur. But if you're running the rules as is and the players are aware of them, they might look to exploit those little gaps in time. Encounter size. So surprise modifiers. If the other party is silenced, invisible, distinctive odor. For every 10 members, there's a +1 to their encounter. If they're camouflaged, there's between a -1 and a -3. So surprise, obviously, you want to roll low for surprise, and you see the modifiers to that. Encounter distance. This is always something that's very interesting to do, and that is to actually determine how far away these encounters are, from one another, so that if you are surprised, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're surprised when they're in combat range or melee range. You might be surprised to see them and they're still 50 yards away. And if they have no missile weapons or anything like that, it's probably very unlikely that they will be able to cover that distance and reach you in the first round anyway. So you could be surprised and still no action takes place because of the distance. Encounter reactions. Again, something I normally, as a DM, will just determine on my own rather than leaving it up to random. You should remember as a DM to remember that the encounter reactions that that intelligent monsters, or beings that your characters are engaging with, they might flight. All right, so avoidance, panic, terror, or surrender. They might decide to they might decide to begin fighting, and then as the tide of the battle turns on them, change their approach. They might become less hostile and try to either surrender or flee in those cases as well. So not all encounters, as I said earlier, not all encounters needs to become combat, especially if you're dealing with intelligent encounters. Okay, so let me go back to this just to refresh my own. Whoa, sorry, that went way far. That's the one problem with scrolling like this. Oh boy. Let's see, what was I going to talk about? Sorry about this. So planned encounters. All right, I remember what I was going to speak to. So I am currently writing an adventure for. It's really for second edition AD&D. However, I'm using the rules and the permissions contained within for Gold and Glory, and this is the second edition, clone, OSR clone of second edition AD&D. So I can write for this and publish for this. I cannot for this. So that's the reason why I'm using it. And as I'm creating this particular adventure, there's encounters, and even if I were to include a random encounter list of possibilities and checks and such, it still needs to make sense. And the PDF actually showed that as well. I mean, they talk about that in the Dungeon Master's Guide, that ultimately it has to make sense for where, what's going on there. And since I think as a DM, if I'm going to be rolling on some random table and then having to omit a lot of the rolls because they don't quite fit, then why waste the time making those rolls? I would just want to include these encounters as they're needed. If I feel that somehow the pace is going too slow and I want to pick up some action into it, or if I feel that so far the player characters have been kind of steamrolling through everything that was prearranged, and so maybe they need another challenge thrown in there, or perhaps they're actually struggling and having a real hard time getting through it. And so I might actually even look at some of those planned encounters and modify them to allow for the players to maybe catch a breather and then re-engage. So it really does have to be designed in a way that I don't believe randomness actually achieves. And it has to make sense. And so I lean more towards having planned encounters and triggers in order to trigger what happens next, or what are several possibilities that can occur based on the player actions, and then move forward with that rather than to throw in random encounters. The only time I typically do random encounters is when the player characters are traveling a good long distance, and then I'll do wilderness encounters along those lines. Or if they are in a dungeon area and they're sleeping, overnight, but those, over the 8 hour period, in order to get their full day's worth of rest. And in those circumstances, the encounters are going to be based on the dungeon, or the cavern, or whatever they happen to be in, and they're going to have to make sense. There's something else that they didn't talk about here, or at least I didn't come across it, is that your dungeons, or your adventure map, wherever it's taking place, needs to feel like it's a living space. If you have a 5 room dungeon and you only encounter anything within the 5 rooms and never in the halls that connect those 5 rooms, it doesn't give the space the feel that it's a living space. It's going to feel very stagnant and very, a little bit too crafted, for the players. So you should have in your mind, well, there are, roaming goblins in the hallways doing various things. They don't always have to be a patrol. You can have 2 goblins that happen to turn the corner and they're pushing a cart with a barrel on it, a barrel of ale on it, and they're pushing it towards wherever the mess hall is in this goblin lair. And they are still capable of raising an alarm or something along those lines, where the players now have to respond to them in order to prevent them from raising that. So there's an encounter that takes place that is a moving encounter, and you can really detail this if you want by having a schedule of movement for the dungeon, and then you just keep track as a DM of how many rounds the players have been traveling, and so you can kind of do that. Now, that's really time consuming and crunchy for the DM, but if you chose to do it like that, you certainly could. Or you could just have in your mind, well, there are several things that I want to just throw in here just to make the dungeon feel more alive. And so even though that's not randomized, it's still putting in an encounter that isn't as planned as what's taking place in a room where you're going to have all of those other details that come into play. So be mindful of when you're using your encounters. Be mindful of the level of difficulty. Be mindful of describing them. Be mindful of their importance to the story of the adventure, or the gains that the player characters are going to gain from this. And even the players, be mindful that your encounters are something that your players are going to have a lot of fun with. All right, and there are many different ways of having for players and for the DM when you're creating these things. So it doesn't always have to be combat. It could be a puzzle room, which I personally am not crazy about because I'm terrible at them. But it could be a variety of things that are in the encounter that what will make it an encounter is the meaningfulness of that experience. All right, so the player characters can enter an empty library and come across a book that teaches them a vast piece of the lore that they need in order to go someplace else. So it's not only an encounter, but it's a trigger. And that's as meaningful as if they entered the library and now they're fighting off, a group of, whatever that happens to be in the library, a group of zombies that are in the library. for whatever reason. So now they have to fight them off. Both, one non-combat, one combat, are still equally meaningful in the outcomes if you create them that way. All right, so if they both include a trigger that goes to something else, then they both become encounters, whether there's combat or not. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. I know a lot of the people that watch my videos aren't actual subscribers. So, please just give it a chance. Subscribe. Watch for my content. My content comes out every 3 or 4 days. We're trying to make it more frequently, and it's just kind of hard to do that. But, please consider subscribing. That way you'll get some notifications as to, when the new videos come up. And also, if I generally practice reciprocity, so if you have your own channel out there, when you subscribe to me, I usually double check and make sure if I'm not already following you, I will subscribe to your channel as well. And hey, leave your questions or comments in the comment section. I'm always open to new ideas or things to take a look at. And that includes other games that are out there or Kickstarters. If you see anything out there that you say, hey, take a look at this DM Bluddworth, I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly look forward to doing that as well. And most of all, I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. All of this time that I'm putting into this walkthrough of 2nd edition AD&D, as I said, I am writing an adventure, as I basically speak here. I'm writing an adventure that I hope to have done within about 2 weeks. And during the spring break, hopefully I'll be able to run it at least a couple of times with my AD&D group right now. Actually, it's a D&D group right now. And get their take on the adventure itself, and then I'm going to be putting it out there on drive-through probably within the next month. I'm planning on doing that, and it's just really good to see you on the gaming screen, so that I can kind of play test the things that I'm working on, or I can certainly be a player in your game if you're doing the same with your products and projects that you're looking to put out there as well. So once again, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Have a great weekend. Stay safe out there, and keep on gaming. Enjoy yourselves. Take care.